I mean, war is the number one area where I don't believe rights conflict, but it's the only area where people actually are put in situations where, you know, American servicemen are put in situations where they're in the aggressor nation, but they want to survive. I mean, this isn't the society we want to envision. We don't want a world where everybody is always taking hostages and there's people blowing each other up and there's chaos. That seems to be the opposite of what we favor. And now, this is interesting because, in a sense, the individualist ethic is also the most respectable and realistic when it comes to approaching even the soldier in an aggressive state. It is difficult to assess the actual moral status of an American serviceman, for example, because the state, well, most important, the state forces the person to be here. The military is the one institution where if you get an employment contract with them, you can't quit. And they can't just, it's not just that they can sue you for damages, they can force you to work for them, force you to kill, force you to die under pain of death. And this is an indentured servitude. This is something that we don't really accept for the most part in the private sector. And without that freedom, without the freedom of the individual soldier to quit his job, which I consider is an important right, it's difficult to know how much we should respect even their willingness to sacrifice, or how many of them would actually stay there at all. So I think this is an important issue. The right, stop loss is terrible. Of course, the conscription is pure evil, but forcing someone to stay in war when they don't want to, I think, is evil too. And it's true, you know, as an individualist, we have to look at what they're doing on the ground. Not every soldier is an aggressor any more than every soldier is a hero. I mean, some of them actually don't commit aggression. Some of them might, you know, on occasion protect someone's rights. It happens. Of course, on balance, when a state invades another country, there's not much of that. But if we do want to support the troops as individuals, we have to restore individual responsibility for their actions and individual liberty for them to quit. Now, this whole idea that from empire comes liberation strikes me as very similar to the socialism that tempted the liberals off course. Because liberalism used to be about, you know, the common person being elevated against the throne and altar or the ancien regime, and the interests of the individual worker and the free market were seen as all kind of tied together until socialism promised liberal ends through statist means. But the warfare state's exactly the same. It promises liberal ends, liberation, through killing and torture and, you know, taxation. And, you know, conservatives point out, well, the half-decent ones, that it's hard to say the welfare state's compassionate when people are forced to fund it, but it's the same thing with a warfare state. I mean, liberation coming out of bombs and razor wire and curfews and martial law, this has to be just absurd on its face. Unfortunately, a lot of individualists, or people who see themselves that way, have come to see the nation-state of America as the great individualist collective, if you will. It represents individualism. It is the march of individualism worldwide, the crusade for individualism. The other people, you know, and they're always demonizing the other. The others, they don't believe in individualism. They don't really have rights until our collective grants them to them. It's kind of the mentality. It's not much of a caricature at all. But really, imperialism it's an evil in the way that communism and totalitarianism and fascism are evils. It's an evil in that it has slaughtered millions of people, and it brings about devastation in social life and corruption of the culture. And Communism has failed, and for this is one of the great triumphs of our lifetimes, to see the end of Stalinism and communism. But it failed for a couple of reasons, and one was ideological. One was people just didn't want to put up with it. And the other was economic. It's unlike what the Reagan Republicans thought, communism doesn't work, so it was bound to collapse. But the economic pressure that eventually brings collectivism to its knees, that eventually forces the laws of gravity to bring the warfare state, the empire, because all empires fail, just like all communist states will fail, it's kind of a slow process at times. What we have to do is stress the ideological side. We can't change the laws of economics, but we could change public opinion, even if 1, 2, 10, 100 people at a time. And this is extremely crucial, because it also will determine what replaces empire. I mean, if the Russians and the Eastern Europeans were total libertarians, communism would have given way to something even much comparably better than it has. I don't want to see the empire crumble with Americans and their lives and their dollars underneath, and I don't want to see it end in a very tragic and painful way. But if we want to not just hasten the end, but make it as soft a fall as possible, if we want to make sure that it never returns again, I think we need to champion individualism, ethical individualism, not just for ourselves, but for all individuals, the taxpayer, the torture victim, the victim of spying, and certainly the victim of bombing, with as much courage and as much determination as we would argue against totalitarianism. And I think not only is individualism the best indictment of the warfare state and imperialism and all these things that we hate, but it's the one it's the only one that can guarantee that when the empire dies, it will never come back. Thank you.
Hello, I really appreciated that speech, and I just wanted to, I think it's very interesting how the media and again the warmongering groups want to keep certain ideas at bay. And I think one of them is, I think we had something where we declared independence, didn't we, and had this idea of self-determination?
Oh, yes.
At some point, I know in distant past, but we never hear in discourse, certainly on the media, the question or the discussion of what about the peoples and the groups where we're going and bombing? Don't they have what do the Iraqis want? And I guess it's, you can tell, well, obviously we have self-determination for our buds because we let the terrorists sit in the tribal regions of Afghanistan because the military dictator there was CIA. So, he's our bud. But, we bomb, the surge is trying to kill Sadr in Iraq because and he's probably a theocrat, he's not necessarily a good guy, but he says Iraq has self-determination and I want the Iraqi people to do that and the Americans to go. So it's selective, but also the word in the discussion is completely avoided. I wonder if...
Well, that's a very important point. In fact, the American Revolution was a revolution against a hypocritical empire, one that claimed to stand for liberty, and to a large extent in the context of the world did internally, but treated its colonial and imperial subjects not with liberty. Though I would argue, honestly,